Daniel Royce was a loyal husband. Samantha Royce was a devoted wife. Eli Turner was the secret that would burn everything to the ground. What began as a quiet affair turned into a calculated trap, one that ended in murder, a cabin fire and a vanished killer. But the real story didn't end in the ashes. It only started there. Daniel Royce was the kind of man people envied. Tall, well-dressed, and always calm under pressure, he had built his reputation in Chicago's cutthroat real estate world with charm and precision. To the outside world, Daniel had everything: wealth, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a wife who adored him. Samantha Royce, a soft-spoken literature teacher at a prestigious private school, was equally admired for her elegance and poise. Together they seemed like the golden couple, intelligent, successful, deeply in love. But in truth, the facade was beginning to wear thin. Their neighbors in Oak Ridge Hills would never guess that Daniel had been sensing something was wrong for months. At first, it was subtle. The way Samantha lingered a little too long on her phone, the way she avoided eye contact when asked simple questions, or how her stories about her day became vague and inconsistent. She used to talk about her students with passion, share amusing anecdotes over dinner. Now she was quiet, often distracted, her eyes always drifting toward the window as if she was waiting for something or someone. Daniel told himself it was his imagination. Every marriage has dry spells. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she needed space. He tried to rekindle the spark, booked a weekend trip to Napa, made time for long dinners, even brought her roses like he used to when they were first dating. She smiled and thanked him, but the glow in her eyes was gone. One night, Daniel walked into the kitchen and saw Samantha quickly close her laptop. She claimed she was looking at lesson plans. When he reached for the computer later, the browsing history was wiped clean. He didn't confront her, he didn't accuse, he simply made a note and began to watch more closely. Her patterns shifted. She started staying late at school every Thursday. She said faculty meetings were dragging on. Daniel, skeptical, once drove by the school around 6 p.m. Her car was gone. He waited in the parking lot until it was dark, but she never returned. That night, she came home smelling faintly of perfume, not her own. Still, Daniel kept quiet. It wasn't until he overheard her talking in the garden that the unease truly took root. Samantha stood among the roses one evening, whispering urgently into her phone. She didn't notice Daniel watching from the upstairs window. He couldn't hear the words, but he caught the tone, a soft, intimate cadence that no husband wants to recognize. The next morning, Samantha was cheerful, unusually affectionate. She made him breakfast, asked about his meetings, and laughed at his jokes like she hadn't in weeks. But her charm only deepened Daniel's suspicion. It wasn't real, it was a cover, something His hands trembled when he picked up her phone later that day. The device was locked. She had changed the password. Daniel Royce was not a man who acted out of impulse. Instead, he made a decision, a quiet one. If there was nothing going on, he would find peace. If there was something more sinister, he would uncover it, piece by piece. So he waited until Samantha went out for groceries and slipped into the garage. Within 15 minutes, he had attached a GPS tracker under her car, a tiny device, invisible unless you knew where to look. That evening, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, staring at the blinking dot on his screen. Thursday was only 3 days away. He didn't know where it would lead him. He didn't know what he would find. But deep down, in the part of him he kept hidden from everyone, Daniel was ready for the truth, no matter how dark it turned out to be. Thursday arrived with an unusual stillness in the air. Daniel woke up before dawn, a pit of unease growing in his stomach. Samantha humming softly to herself, dressed carefully that morning. She wore her cream-colored blouse and navy pencil skirt, an outfit he'd seen many times before, but today she took extra time with her makeup, brushing a soft pink gloss onto her lips with more attention than usual. Daniel watched her from the doorway, pretending to sip his coffee, his expression unreadable. At exactly 7:45 a.m., Samantha kissed him goodbye, grabbed her keys, and left for work. Daniel waited 10 minutes before opening the tracking app on his laptop. A small red dot appeared on the map, moving through the city streets. He watched it pause near her school, as expected. Hours passed, and the dot remained motionless. Then at 3:52 p.m., the dot began to move again. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He watched as the tracker veered away from the school, taking a route that had nothing to do with traffic or errands. It snaked through the city, turning off onto smaller streets, deeper into an unfamiliar part of downtown. After 20 minutes, it stopped, right outside a modest, gray-bricked building near the edge of the river district. Curious, Daniel grabbed his coat and left the house. It was early evening, and the streets were starting to fill with people heading home from work. He parked a block away and approached the building on foot, careful to keep his distance. There was no sign out front, just a discreet metal plaque near the entrance that read, Turner Gallery, Art. Samantha had never mentioned an interest in art. He checked the location again on his phone. The red dot was still there, inside the gallery. Daniel stood across the street, watching. For nearly an hour, no one came out. Then the lights flickered inside and two silhouettes passed by the front window, one of them unmistakably. Even from a distance, he recognized the curve of her shoulders, the delicate way she tilted her head when listening. The man with her was tall, lean, with dark hair pulled back in a small knot. They stood close, too close. At 5:32 p.m., the door opened. Samantha stepped out, her face glowing with laughter, followed by the man. They didn't touch, but the electricity between them was unmistakable. Daniel remained perfectly still behind the tinted windows of his car. He didn't take photos. He didn't call out. He simply watched as they walked side by side down the block, then parted ways at the corner. Samantha headed to her car, unaware of the eyes locked on her from afar. She returned home that evening with a grocery bag in hand, greeting Daniel with a kiss on the cheek. Long day, she said casually. Parent-teacher conferences. He nodded, said nothing, and poured her a glass of wine. Later that night, while she showered, Daniel opened her purse. Inside, beneath her wallet and makeup bag, was a folded pamphlet, Turner Gallery, Autumn Exhibition Opening Night Invitation. The date was next Thursday, so it wasn't just casual, it wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper, something ongoing, something planned. Daniel sat in the dark of his office, the city lights blinking softly through the window. The truth had come faster than he expected, and it was uglier than he had imagined. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was personal, layered, deliberate. But instead of confronting her, he felt something colder settle inside him. He wouldn't shout, he wouldn't beg for answers, he would investigate, he would learn everything, and when the time was right, she wouldn't even see it coming. The following week crept by with a slow, suffocating tension. Every moment between Daniel and Samantha was a quiet performance. Meals shared with polite smiles, conversations carefully measured, physical contact limited to routine gestures. She had no idea he knew. That alone gave Daniel an invisible edge, one he wielded like a scalpel, slicing through her lies without making a sound. Thursday returned like a shadow, long and cold. By noon Daniel was in his car, waiting several blocks away from Turner Gallery. He wore a baseball cap, sunglasses, and kept his head low as he watched the entrance through a pair of tinted lenses. At 3:48 p.m., Samantha's car pulled up. She parked casually, looked around once, and entered the building with a sense of familiarity that stung more than he expected. 20 minutes later, a delivery truck pulled into the alley behind the gallery. Daniel saw his opportunity. He exited his car and followed the truck down the alley, pretending to check his phone as he moved. When the delivery man propped open the back entrance to unload several large boxes, Daniel slipped in behind him, unnoticed. Inside, the gallery was quiet. The main exhibition space glowed with soft lighting and minimalist decor, sleek white walls adorned with abstract paintings and sculpture. But Daniel wasn't there for the art. He moved slowly, his footsteps muffled against the hardwood floors, listening. Then he heard them, muffled voices carried from a back room, low and indistinct. He crept toward the sound, stopping just before the hallway turned. A door at the end was slightly ajar. Through the narrow gap, he saw them, Samantha and the man from the week before, Eli Turner. They were seated close together on a velvet bench, two wine glasses on the table in front of them. Her heels were off, her hair was. She looked at ease, completely unguarded in a way Daniel hadn't seen in months. Eli leaned forward, said something, and Samantha laughed, soft, genuine, intimate. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Daniel turned away before he could see more. His jaw tightened, his breath sharp in his throat. But he didn't storm in, he didn't scream. He walked silently back through the gallery, exited the same back door and returned to his car. He He sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel like a vice. He'd come here expecting to confirm what he already knew, but seeing it, feeling the raw betrayal in person, hit harder than he was prepared for. The years of trust, of shared dreams and memories, were nothing more than a mask she had worn while slipping into another man's arms. Still, Daniel Royce wasn't built for breakdowns. He was built for structure, for precision, for revenge. That night, after Samantha had fallen asleep, Daniel entered the garage again. This time, he wasn't planting a tracker, he was pulling up a floorboard beneath his workbench. Hidden inside was a metal lockbox he hadn't touched in years. Inside it were items from a different time in his life: military-grade zip ties, a burner phone, a combat knife, and an old key to a remote property in Wisconsin, a cabin. It was remote, private, forgotten. He closed the box slowly, his expression blank, his mind already working ahead. The gallery, Eli Turner, Samantha, the affair, it all fit together like the beginning of a strategy. A plan was forming, not emotional, but methodical, each piece moving in silence, one by one. Daniel didn't need confrontation, he needed control, and now he had both. For days after his visit to the gallery, Daniel replayed what he had seen over and over in his mind. The intimacy, the ease between Samantha and Eli, the soft light on her smiling face, each detail dug deeper into him like a splinter lodged beneath the skin. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was still something missing. The pieces of the affair didn't fully add up. Something deeper had to be buried beneath the surface. He needed more information, not just about Eli Turner, but about what Samantha was planning. And there was one person who might hold those answers: Jenna Collins. Jenna had been Samantha's closest friend for years. They met at the school where they both taught, Jenna in the art department, Samantha in literature. Daniel had always found Jenna a little too observant, too nosy for comfort, but now that might be useful. If anyone had been trusted with the truth, it was her. He invited Jenna over one Saturday afternoon, under the pretense of needing help planning a surprise anniversary event for Samantha. She arrived wearing her usual oversized cardigan, a tote bag on her shoulder, and a slight look of confusion on her face. Daniel had staged everything, lit candles, opened a bottle of wine, scattered old photographs of him and Samantha on the coffee table. "I want to do something special for her," he told Jenna, his tone soft, weary. "I think she's been distant lately. I want to remind her of how much I care." Jenna hesitated. She sipped her wine, her eyes scanning the photos like she didn't quite believe the story. For a moment, it seemed like she might brush it all off with a friendly lie, but then she sighed, long and slow, and set her glass down. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she said, her voice low, "but you deserve to know." Daniel said nothing. He let the silence stretch, coaxing her to fill it. "She's been seeing someone," Jenna continued. "It's been months, almost a year I think. She met him through one of the school fundraising events. He owns an art gallery downtown, Eli Turner." Hearing the name spoken aloud sent a cold pulse through Daniel's chest. He kept his expression calm. "She told me it was just physical at first," Jenna went on, almost apologetically, "but it changed. She said she feels alive with him in a way she doesn't with you anymore." Daniel nodded, his fingers tightening subtly around his wine glass. "Is she planning to leave me?" Jenna hesitated again, this time longer. "She said she might. After the school year ends. She wants to make a clean break, move away. She's been looking at apartments in New York." That detail hit like a hidden blade. Samantha hadn't just betrayed him, she'd planned to erase him, quietly disappear and start over, like he had been nothing but a chapter in her story. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thanked Jenna for her honesty, and assured her it would stay between them. After she left, he sat alone in the dark, the flickering candlelight casting jagged shadows across the walls. The plan she had kept hidden was now in his hands, and that changed everything. She hadn't just lied, she hadn't just cheated, she had replaced him. And now Daniel understood what had to be done, not in anger, not in desperation, but with purpose, with absolute clarity, because love wasn't the opposite of hate, it was the perfect disguise for vengeance. Daniel spent the next week constructing the illusion of peace. Each morning, he greeted Samantha with a gentle smile, kissed her forehead, and made her coffee just the way she liked it. He asked about her students, complimented her new dresses, and even suggested they take a weekend away together to reconnect. She seemed surprised by the gesture, but not suspicious. Whatever guilt she may have once carried, had clearly faded. In her eyes Daniel was still oblivious, a loyal husband desperate to save what was already broken beyond repair. What she didn't know was that the weekend trip wasn't about reconnecting at all. It was a set. Daniel told her he had booked a remote cabin in the woods of northern Wisconsin, a place with no cell signal, no neighbors and no distractions, just the two of them, surrounded by trees to celebrate their 10-year anniversary. She hesitated, claiming she might have to stay for a school function that weekend, but Daniel insisted. He made it sound spontaneous and romantic, and after some coaxing, she agreed. What she didn't know was that Eli Turner would be there 2 days before the trip. Daniel created a new email account using a fake name. He used it to send Eli a message, carefully written and impossible to trace. She wants you to meet her, no more sneaking around, drive up to Cedar Pine's cabin on Friday night, she'll be waiting. He attached a photo of the cabin, and provided directions. The message was short, vague, but believable, especially for a man already convinced that Samantha wanted to leave her husband. By Friday afternoon, Daniel had packed the car blankets, food, wine and all the essentials for a romantic retreat. He also brought the less visible items, zip ties, gloves, a hammer and a small bottle of pills crushed into powder. Samantha, smiling as she buckled into the passenger seat, had no idea they weren't coming back. The drive was long and winding, the sky gray and heavy with the promise of rain. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering pines that muffled sound and cloaked the place in eerie silence. It hadn't been used in years, but Daniel had cleaned it just enough to pass as rustic charm. He even placed candles around the living room, arranged 2 wine glasses on the table, and made the bed with fresh linens. They arrived just before sunset. Samantha stepped inside and looked around with a pleased smile. She said it was beautiful. Daniel nodded, hiding the weight of what he knew behind calm eyes. He offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted without question. He didn't drug it, not yet. Later that evening, he excused himself to get firewood. Instead, he walked out to the edge of the property, where he knew Eli's car would eventually appear. He didn't have to wait long. Just after 9 p.m., headlights emerged between the trees, a sleek black SUV. Eli parked, stepped out and looked around, confused. Daniel stayed hidden behind the trees, watching as Eli approached the cabin, hesitating only once before opening the door and stepping inside. Daniel waited another minute before following. The door creaked open behind them. 2 sets of eyes turned toward him, one shocked, the other terrified. Daniel closed the door and locked it. The door clicked shut behind Daniel, sealing the 3 of them inside the cabin like a coffin. The only sound was the crackling of the fireplace, and the faint wind tapping against the windows. Eli stood frozen in the center of the room, confusion etched across his face, still wearing the illusion that this might be some kind of strange coincidence. Samantha, sitting on the couch with her wine glass half raised, went pale. Her hand trembled slightly, and the glass clinked as she set it down. Daniel didn't speak. He walked past both of them, calmly, deliberately, and placed a small duffel bag on the floor near the fireplace. His silence was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. It was the quiet control of someone who had already decided what would happen. His eyes, once warm and thoughtful, were now unreadable, cold, flat, and void of emotion. Eli finally broke the silence, asking questions Daniel didn't answer. Samantha stood, her voice cracking as she tried to explain. But it didn't matter. The room had already shifted. Time seemed to slow. There was no exit, only revelation and consequence. Daniel pulled a small pistol from the duffel bag and placed it on the table. He didn't point it. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at them, eyes sharp and empty. Then he ordered them to sit. They obeyed. From that point forward, the night unraveled in eerie calmness. Daniel had prepared everything: lengths of rope, pre-cut, duct tape, and heavy-duty zip ties. He secured Eli to a wooden chair first, then turned to Samantha. She didn't fight. Her face was frozen in a mixture of disbelief and horror, as if she still couldn't accept that this was really happening, as if the man she had deceived for nearly a year couldn't possibly be capable of something so final. But she didn't know Daniel anymore. He asked questions, not because he needed the answers, but because he wanted them to hear themselves say it. When did it start? How long had they planned to leave? What were they going to do after he was out of the picture? Samantha sobbed. Eli refused to speak. But it didn't matter. Daniel already knew everything he needed to know. This wasn't an interrogation, It was a reckoning. The storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the windows. Lightning lit up the room in quick, violent flashes. And still Daniel remained calm. He poured himself a glass of wine and sat across from them, staring as if he were admiring a finished painting. The weight of the silence pressed down like a stone. Hours passed. When dawn approached, the events inside the cabin took a darker turn, one that no one outside those four walls would ever truly understand. The screams, if there were any, were swallowed by the storm. There were no witnesses, no chance of escape. Sometime after sunrise, smoke began curling into the sky. The cabin burned fast. The old wood, dry despite the rain, fed the flames until they reached high into the trees. By the time a hiker spotted the fire from a distant ridge and alerted authorities, it was too late. The entire structure was a smoldering ruin, blackened and skeletal. Inside, investigators found two bodies charred and unrecognizable, one male, one female, both bound. There was no sign of Daniel Royce. The car registered in his name was missing, so was his phone, wallet, and any trace of his presence. It was as if he had vanished into the smoke. But the truth was more complicated, and someone had left the fire alive. In the days following the fire, the case gripped headlines across the state. Married couple dead in remote cabin fire, husband missing, the newspapers read. Investigators combed through the wreckage for answers, but there was little left to examine. The fire had destroyed nearly everything. The floorboards had collapsed, the roof had caved in, and only two burned bodies remained, one male, one female, both so disfigured that facial identification was impossible. The cabin was remote, hours from the nearest town. No nearby homes, no cameras, no cell signal. The only tip came from a lone hiker who spotted the smoke from a trailhead several miles away. By the time emergency crews arrived, the structure was engulfed, and the fire had consumed everything but its tragic mystery. The case was handed over to Detective Marcus Lane, a seasoned investigator known for his patience and quiet persistence. He didn't buy the initial theory the department floated, that Daniel Royce had lured his wife and her lover to the cabin, murdered them both in a jealous rage, and fled into hiding. Something about it didn't sit right. The story felt too clean, too theatrical. Lane had seen enough domestic homicides to know that rage usually left a mess, but this felt rehearsed. The first break came from a minor detail that most might have overlooked: tire tracks. While the fire had erased almost everything, the muddy trail leading to the cabin held the impression of two separate vehicles, one that matched Samantha's car, and another that didn't belong to Daniel Royce. That was the first red flag. The second came from the autopsy. Forensics had very little to work with, but dental records provided a match for the female body, Samantha Royce. The male body, however, remained a mystery. With no usable fingerprints or intact dental samples, the only identifier was a single bone fragment that had survived the heat. DNA was pulled, but the results were slow. Detective Lane didn't wait. He began digging into Eli Turner, Samantha's alleged lover. When he arrived at the Turner Gallery, it was closed indefinitely. No sign of Eli, no record of a planned trip, no contact with employees or friends. It was as if he had vanished. Lane traced Eli's phone, but the device had gone dark 2 days before the fire. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured his vehicle heading north. The same night Samantha and Daniel drove to Wisconsin. It was enough to suggest he had made it to the cabin, but if the burned male body wasn't Eli Turner, then who was it? The DNA results came back 3 days later. The male victim wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel Royce. Detective Lane sat with the report, rereading the name again and again. The implications shifted everything. If Daniel was dead, that meant Eli had survived. Not only survived, but escaped, which raised an even more disturbing possibility. Had Eli killed Daniel and set the fire himself? Had he murdered Samantha too, or had Samantha and Eli planned it together? The case flipped overnight. A man once believed to be the killer was now the victim, and the true perpetrator or perpetrators had vanished without a trace. Lane issued a nationwide alert for Eli Turner, but there were no leads, no sightings, no credit card activity. It was as if he had stepped off the earth. The only thing Lane could do now was trace Eli's past, his finances, his habits, his weak points. Someone had staged a double murder, lit a fire to erase the truth, and walked away free, but Lane knew something else too. Killers always make mistakes. It was just a matter of time before this one surfaced again, and when he did, the story would burn all over again. The Royce cabin fire faded from the headlines like all tragedies do, replaced by newer scandals, fresher crimes, but Detective Marcus Lane never closed the file. The case gnawed at him quietly, like a splinter beneath the skin. The mystery was incomplete, the motives clouded, and too many questions remained unanswered. He had a folder in his drawer marked simply Cedar Pine. He opened it often, staring at the photos of the burned cabin, the autopsy reports, the tire track measurements. Something about the way it all ended, too clean, too cinematic, kept him up at night. Then in the spring, a call came from Interpol. A body had turned up in Buenos Aires, Argentina, female, American, mid-30s, found in a luxury hotel room. No signs of struggle, but the toxicology report showed high concentrations of digitalis, a slow-working poison. When local authorities ran the prints through international databases, they got a match. Samantha Royce. She hadn't died in the fire after all. Lane felt the air leave the room when he read the report. The cabin, the bodies, the screams, none of it had gone the way they thought. Samantha had faked her death, burned someone else in her place, and disappeared across the globe. But who was the dead woman in the cabin? Had Samantha murdered another innocent, or had Eli helped her stage the switch? Lane couldn't answer that yet. What he did know was that she'd surfaced, and now she was dead. Which meant one thing: Eli Turner had killed her. Local hotel staff reported the woman had checked in under the name Elena Rice, and was traveling with a man named David Kessler. No photos, no IDs left behind. The man had vanished after her death, taking nothing from the room except the woman's passport and all her electronics. Security footage was grainy, but Lane recognized him immediately. The hair was shorter, the face slimmer, but it was Eli Turner, cool, composed, calculated. He had killed Samantha Royce, maybe for fear she'd expose him, maybe to close a loose end, or maybe because, like Daniel before her, she had finally become inconvenient. Lane filed an official extradition request for Turner, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Eli was long gone, the man was a ghost. No bank trails, no calls, no digital footprint, a shadow in a world of light. The media got hold of the story again. Wife fakes death in cabin murder, later found dead in Argentina. News outlets exploded with theories. Some said Daniel was still alive. Some believed Samantha was killed by a different enemy. One viral thread claimed the cabin fire had been staged by all three of them, a triangle of deception gone wrong. But Marcus Lane knew better. This wasn't a love triangle. It was a slow-burning execution carried out over months, one betrayal at a time, and now only one player remained on the board. Somewhere in the world, Eli Turner was breathing free, living under another name, walking through crowded cities unnoticed. But he had made a mistake. He thought killing Samantha would end the trail. He didn't expect Lane to still be watching. Back in Chicago, Lane updated the file and placed it back in his drawer. The Royce case wasn't closed, it was evolving, and eventually, Eli would surface again. They always do. When that happened, Marcus Lane would be ready, and this time, the fire wouldn't burn the truth away.